Hello, and welcome back to the Second Act Success Career Podcast. I am your host, Shannon Russell. Before we get into the episode, I just wanted to take a second to thank you. Thank you for leaving reviews, for leaving your comments, giving me feedback on the show. It really means the world to me. I'm going to read a recent review that was left on Apple Podcast. It is from Sam B. Guya. It reads, "Such an inspirational show. I love that each episode is packed with actionable advice, and Shannon's guests offer such diverse perspectives. And the personal development tips are on point. Thank you." No, thank you so much for taking the time to leave this review. I truly appreciate it. And if you are listening, if you have been with me for any amount of time and you are getting value from the podcast, I would love it if you could head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review, and let me know what you think. It really means a lot. Okay, now let's shift gears and get into this episode. Today we are talking about career changes and, again, that thread that can lead you from one career into the other. And if you follow your passions, you really can find work that lights you up. Today in studio, I have my friend, Cindy Bertram. She and I are former colleagues. We worked together many years ago in the television industry. Cindy began her career as a graphic artist in television. She went on to become a television writer, a producer. She has crafted thousands of hours of content on shows for HGTV, Dr. Phil, Hard Copy, the TV Guide Network, and she has just launched her very first cookbook. Let me introduce you to Cindy so she can share her second act success story with us. Here is my friend, Cindy Bertram. Cindy Bertram, welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Cindy and I worked together at the TV Guide Network many years ago, and she's just done so many incredible things. So let's get into it. Where did your career begin?
Well, I do think it's funny that neither of us are doing what we did at TV Guide, but
So true.
my career began in a roundabout way because I originally wanted to be a graphic artist and went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena as a high school student. They had this really cool program called Saturday High, where you could go every Saturday during your high school career and get college credit. So by the time I became eligible to be a college student, I already had credit at one of the most prestigious design schools, not thinking about the fact that it was very expensive and you couldn't have a job while you're going there. So it ended up not being for me. But what I did do was major in journalism and English at Cal State Northridge, and then went into graphic design. So, roundabout way, I
Yeah.
wanted to be a TV producer. And I got my first job at Paramount Pictures after taking a typing test in the secretarial pool back in the 90s and got a job as the assistant to the executive in charge of production for Hard Copy, which
Ooh.
was a tabloid television show. And I was wanting to be a writer, and I was working for the person in charge of the show. And one day, 2 months after I started, the director came running upstairs from where they were taping the show, pointed at me and said, "You know how to type. Come downstairs." He had fired the girl who was doing the graphics, and they put me on the spot, sitting at a keyboard to type all of the names that would come up during the show and who was talking and different pictures and things like that. And after the show ended that day, the executive in charge, who was my boss, said, "Well, I guess you have to find me a new assistant because they won't hire you for this job. And you have to join the union, and it's this many thousands of dollars, but I guess I have to pay it." Long story short, my 2 month producing aspirations went into 15 years of doing live graphics for television. So never know where things are going to lead you. I did
Seriously.
television graphic for the first 15 years of my career.
Were you excited about this opportunity, like paycheck aside? Did you find it interesting or were you just running with it?
Because I had the fascination of the graphic side of things to begin with, but also the journalism side of things. And although it was, one of those like gossip shows, it still followed the news as it happened. And we got like OJ Simpson happened during this time, and the Menendez brothers happened during this time, and Michael Jackson, and like all these big news events happened during this time. And so it fed the journalism bug, it fed the graphics bug, and it also fed the TV producing bug, because one of the things I'll never forget is my boss said, learn every job in the room and you'll never be out of work. And while I was sitting behind this keyboard, I was sitting behind the director. I was sitting behind the technical director. I was sitting behind the associate director. I was sitting next to the executive producer. I was sitting next to the lawyer. So all of these positions that were happening around me were things that I watched every day for 15 years. So
Mm.
while it may not have been fulfilling in terms of difficulty maybe, and kind of not skill, it did take a certain skill. And I had to teach myself every single computer as it advanced. That was challenging, but it didn't maybe fulfill me creatively as much. It definitely fulfilled my brain. And it led the way to my next career, which was writing and producing. And that wouldn't have happened had I not had that first career. So, yes. And the money was great. Yes. Aside from that, the learn every job in the room was probably the best lesson I ever got, because I went into a writing and producing career knowing that television timed in seconds, and
Mm.
so I could write a script to time, and no other writer could do that because I'd been sitting in live TV for 15 years. So it gave me all these skills and also speed that I don't think a lot of other producers had. So
Mm.
yeah, definitely worth it.
That lesson can be brought into many other industries because you're often in a boardroom or in a cubicle with other job titles. So you can do the same thing. You can learn what people around you do because you never know when you can use those skills. That's such a great opportunity that you had, that you were able to jump on and really dive in and learn and see maybe what you liked and what you didn't like from the other aspects of television.
There are a few things notably that I think were invaluable. One was I was young. I was 21 years old, just out of college, working in a room full of men who screamed. And, television, as well as I do, becomes very kind of heated. And that whole like broadcast news movie that everybody thinks is a joke really isn't. It's a high pressure thing. People raise voices, people scream at you. They forget it the minute after the show airs, but it teaches you to have a thick skin. It teaches you to really focus on the moment and then kind of brush things off, which maybe you shouldn't always. I was able to grow and mature in a situation with adults that, at 21 years of age, you don't really expect to be in that high pressure of a situation. You kind of expect to grow in your career. And to say I was thrown into the deep end, I definitely was, but it prepared me and gave me the strength to do anything that came after that, and to hold my own and to be in this male dominated industry, that I could be just as strong as anybody else. And I could be as creative and as, independent and forward thinking and all of the things that typically in the boardroom or behind the camera is usually this man's world, that I think women are really, really good at, because we're very quick on our feet and very quick to adapt. So all of those things really added up to having the wherewithal to do anything I wanted from that moment on.
And that quick thinking, for the listeners who are listening and may not know how graphic design is used in television, anything graphically on that screen is something that you were creating and making happen live a lot of times.
At the beginning of my career, it was mainly a keyboard that put names on a bar, like you're watching the news and the person who's talking or the reporter's talking to, their name pops up. Also, I ran a still generator, which was photos that would pop up over the anchor's shoulder and show who we were talking about. But all of those things you kind of had to anticipate and follow what the anchor is saying. And in the case of talk shows that I worked on later, Dr. Phil is a perfect example. You have to really predict what they're going to say. And Dr. Phil used to come in, we'd have a meeting every morning, and he would show, I'd go through all the graphics and he would say, well, I might call for this at any time, and I might call for this at any time, and I might call for this. And you just kind of had to say, okay, I'll be there. And you really had to pay close attention because you have to then envelop all of it together. And so that's, I think, what got me ready for my second act.
Yes. You had your career, Dr. Phil. You and I worked together at TV Guide Network on various shows. And so, when did you make a shift from working in this capacity to trying other things and really getting into more of the producing and writing aspect?
I was a writer by hobby at that point. I had a column in the Los Angeles Times that was a little Carrie Bradshaw part of my life where I got to write about my dating life, which was fun. And luckily, a friend of mine had taken a job at HGTV and sent me a script one day, almost 20 years ago now, and said, can you polish this? Can you make it sound more conversational and more fun and more you? Because my column in the Times was really tongue in cheek and very light and very witty. And so I did. And then, to me, he turned it in as spec for me to become their new writer. Graphics kind of had run its course by then. And I knew it wasn't fulfilling me emotionally. And, it was definitely fulfilling my bank account, but that's not everything. And yet at that point, I had been in it 15 years and I felt like I could take the risk. And so I did. And everybody thought I was crazy. And they thought, you're leaving like the best gigs in television because I really at that point did have kind of my pick of shows. I then flew to Knoxville, Tennessee and wrote White House Christmas in 2007. And while I was there, I managed the edit rooms as well because that was what I was used to. So they suddenly had this writer who knew how to get a show to time, who knew how to get edit notes ready, who knew how to do all this backside technical things that writers don't normally do. And they went, oh, we can get like three for the price of one. So, the learn every job in the room thing came into play again because then I made myself invaluable to them. They had never hired a writer before who knew post production, who knew live, who they could send footage and I could write it and put it together as it was coming in. So they then asked me if I wanted to sign on for all of their specials, which I did. And then they also had a branded entertainment division that was starting this little project called intromercials, which are basically these short interstitials that were graphics based. So, learned every job in the room. I had a graphics background and a television background. And so all of these things kind of came into play, and I became their producer for their branded entertainment and their producer for their specials. And then kind of became over the next 10 years their show doctor who would just come swoop in if there was a problem, fix it. There was never a moment of, am I going to work? Even
Mm.
though technically I wasn't employed there, I was a freelance person. So now, all these years later, the joke is I'm the longest running unemployed person at HGTV. I
That is so true. You left a union position to go
did.
freelance, which is unheard of for a lot of us in the industry, but it worked out. It worked out for a long time for you.
It worked out for a really long time. And I did have my father who said, when are you going to get a real job? And then still thinks I didn't all these years later. But you leave stability, you leave a union, you leave a base pay that you're guaranteed. Biggest thing, you leave guaranteed benefit. And that for me was the hardest because I take healthcare very seriously. I come from a family of healthcare workers and educators, and it was very like anti-tradition to go and take this risk. And so I started an LLC when I was 30 years old and I created my own business and came up with a name and came up with a website and, kind of at a time when it wasn't really being done and when it wasn't being done by women specifically, and got companies to hire me as a corporation instead of a 1099 employee because that would benefit me, on the expense side, but gave me a legitimacy that I think maybe I wouldn't have had if I was just this like, oh, hire Cindy. It was hire Cindy's company, and I think you understand that as well, because when you are a woman business owner, you have something behind your name
Mm.
that a lot of women don't often have. And so that became really important to me. It became really important to me as I began producing in a bigger role to hire more women and to give more opportunity to small business owners and, and those people who maybe didn't get their break yet, and it became really important to me to mentor students at different schools and different younger people in my life. And anyone to this day who still says, I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm kind of interested in TV. I'll drop everything and talk to them because I think it's really important. Not gotten that job at 21, I wouldn't be where I am. So
Yeah.
it works differently. And I think that it leads you down a path that no one could have predicted.
You got those lessons at a young age for sure. And I never would have thought, and looking back as a business owner now, I wish I had incorporated myself and started an LLC when I was freelancing all those years because it almost shows you as more of a value as well. Like for you, you could say, well, I can do all of these things and wear all of these hats. So put me where you want me, put me where you need to fill that gap, and I can do it. And I think you're right. It shows just an added professionalism, maybe, but it ended up setting you up for success for all of your projects to come as well. And you could be more choosy at that point in your career about what you wanted to do.
Yeah. And I mean, and we're our harshest critics, right? So I will always criticize my trajectory or think, oh, I could have done this differently or I could do this because I could have taken, a role that I would have been in for 30 years now and maybe had a lot more stability. But I definitely look back on my past and feel proud. I don't think I'm done. And for example, I just wrote a cookbook for someone. What am I doing writing a cookbook? But, I had pitched a television show for this amazing person who owns restaurants. Basically, California state parks gave her the opportunity to transform old like hamburger shacks that are sitting on the sand and come up with a concept for something that had never been done. And she already had a couple of brick and mortar restaurants in Huntington Beach. One was called Sea Legs and one was called Sea Salt. Very well known, and they were great restaurants. And admittedly, I chased her for about 10 years because I knew there was something about her. She was a very successful woman owned entrepreneur in Orange County. And there was just something about her and her energy that I knew she needed a podcast or a show or a book or something. And I watched her create these beach clubs that were all different themes, all different menus, music, everything. And I mean, it's like that, the magic wand where you hit the like dilapidated concrete beach shack that was a hamburger stand. And she turned it into this music venue where people come and drink and dance and eat. And the food is like at this high level. She has the only alcohol license on the sand in Orange County, and she's turned these into these magic locations. So I pitched a show 2 years ago to Food Network. She wanted to find somebody to run one of her clubs. And the prize was going to be they get the club. Like they get to run
Mm.
the club and make it their own, get a six-figure salary. And it was this really cool concept. And it would be a culinary competition that people would come from all over the country. You get to work on the sand, beautiful Southern California, Surf City, USA, and Food Network passed, went pretty far, but it didn't go. And she said, I really want to write a cookbook. Would you be interested in writing a cookbook? Okay. Because why not? What would have benefited if I had said, well, I've never written a cookbook, so no. Because then now I can say, oh, I've written a cookbook. Does you want me to write yours?
And you
So
wrote television, so you are a writer. It's just a different aspect of writing.
I've written medical journals. I've written different newspaper articles. I've written magazine articles. There's a little box on my desk that said writer's writing. And that's it. You just write. And it doesn't matter what you write, it just matters that you write. So we were both really bummed, but we had built a relationship and we had worked really hard on something creative and we didn't want it to end. And she said, I really want to do a cookbook that pays homage to California cuisine, that really is a nod to all of these clubs and all of their different food and the guests and the clientele. And she said, would you want to do it for me? And I said, sure. First goal was we got to sit down and figure out the recipes. And so she sat in my office and like I produced her. I did it exactly like I would any interview. I recorded her. We talked about all of the clubs, all of the dishes, things that were her favorite, things that were, customer favorites and why, and the history of the dishes, because they all kind of needed to tell a story. And the reason it says volume one is that it's just a piece of all of these restaurants. And it's not everything. And she's not done. She's opening another one in April. She's gotten at LAX. She has so many things going on in that head of hers that I don't think that it's the end. I think there are many more. So she said, this is in the book, this is in the book, this is in the book, and here's what's in it. And I went, okay, she got any recipes? So starting in June, and my husband had a great summer, I made all 65 recipes in the book in my kitchen, probably about 4 or 5 times each. And I'd call her, I'd send her pictures, or she'd come over and I'd say, is this right? Do you think this is right? And I recipe tested all summer while I wove this story together of this crazy entrepreneur and her dreams. And it was just this really cool adventure to be on. And then the TV side of me got it done because then it had to be formatted. Then it had to be designed. Then it had to be, laid in graphically. And I had to find a printer and I had to find a book bindery and like all of these pieces that I then became a book publisher randomly
Hmm.
because I didn't know how to do it. But it goes along with the learn every job in the room. She didn't know how to do it either. And she's running 8 clubs. So who's going to do it? I
Yep.
did. So the book is going to be in our hands in, couple weeks. Here's the pressed copy.
Beautiful. The book is called California Fork and Spoon.
Alicia Cox is the person on the cover and the creator of this entire empire. And she gave me the chance of a lifetime. And I'll never forget it.
Mm.
Pre-orders out, and we're doing a book signing at one of her clubs on the 21st. And then I think I have Barnes and Noble lined up for January. And we're going to get a couple of bookstores to carry it in the Orange County area. And then California State Parks, who is her partner, they're going to carry it in all of their headquarters, which is so
Wow.
cool. Yeah.
That's so cool because people all over the world want to try California cuisine, and you can only get it in California. And now they'll be able to make it at home, and the pictures look beautiful. And so you've got this project, you're still working in TV, you've got your hand in a bunch of different creative projects. And how do you feel with your career at this point in the second act of yours, which has exploded?
You have a couple of like pinnacle. Like one of mine really, really was to sell my own show and be the executive producer of my own show. And last year, I was lucky enough to executive produce Lincoln Log Masters on Roku, which I pitched to Hasbro to borrow their IP of that little childhood game that we all loved. And I found, a casting team found two great guys who built log homes in Oregon, and Hasbro agreed to give them the IP to brand their log homes, Lincoln Log Homes. And that we produced this fun little show that was so cool. Unfortunately, it only had one season so far, but just so great to like actually have that accomplishment and know that it was my concept. And I sold it in the room. I sold it to Roku, and you're given about 5 minutes to pitch a show. And so it was a really huge accomplishment. That was that great box to be checked. So that was one. I still have the unfinished novel that all writers have sitting somewhere. So finishing that will be next on the list. And I'm just really enjoying being in the executive producing side of things and more of the conceptual side of things because you get to be more creative. And I'm definitely not done. You go through life and you have these goals and they're not necessarily the goals you thought you would have. Certainly I thought I maybe would have a family and I maybe would, be at a different point in life. But I love the journey and I think I'm where I'm meant to be and I can't wait to see what's next.
Not done yet. Let me ask you, Cindy, what is a piece of advice that you would give to someone who is about to change careers, start a business, write a book, just start that second act? What advice would you give them?
Try not to be terrified contemplating that second act, which ironically, I think a lot of women in television are right now. A lot of people in general, because TV is going through a really weird phase. But I think the biggest advice I would give to anyone who is contemplating really changing their entire career is what do you have to lose? Because if it doesn't work, you can always go back to what you were doing. Chances are it will work. And especially if you're passionate about it. So just go for it. And maybe try not to burn bridges along the way because you may need to go back a little bit. But I really think is just try not to be scared of the unknown. I think that there are a lot of different avenues that you can take to achieve a common goal. And it may not be the path you thought you would take, but you'll get there eventually. So, biggest thing would be to just go for it and not be afraid.
That's the best advice. You're proof of that because you thought that you would potentially maybe try to sell a show and you did it and you checked the box. You never thought that you would write a cookbook, and you're doing that, and you can check that box. So I think we can surprise ourselves by stepping out of our comfort zone and facing that fear and just taking that leap to see what we can accomplish. And there's nothing cooler than being able to say, I did it. And you know what? If it doesn't work, then you can just say, okay, I tried and now I'll know. But you don't want to have that regret for having that dream and not even trying to seek it out.
I think that's the biggest thing. I think that we, especially we're living longer and careers are longer. And certainly as women, we're not expected to take as many risks, but we have time. And I think that you don't want to look back and have any regrets. You want to be able to say, well, I tried. And I don't think that anyone fails. I think that timing is big in anything and it may just not be the right time, but you'll never know unless you try. And I'm doing this other random thing now that kind of appeals to my other creative side, which is I'm doing a little side hustle as a professional organizer. And it's a little fill in salary. It satisfies my severe need to be neat and orderly. And it also is this really weird emotional fulfillment because the people who I'm doing it for they're not necessarily hoarders. They're not dirty. They have very busy professional lives and their home or their office is the last thing that gets attention. So if I can go in my free time and help get them some order, it's life changing for them. And something that I think is so minimal because I live in that kind of order because it's calming to me. Someone who has never lived in it and suddenly has it has done amazing things in their career because they have this chaos that is calmed. So I just did one for an HGTV talent who on the outside has a beautiful home. She posts it on Instagram all the time. It's gorgeously designed and you open every closet and drawer and it is complete chaos. And she has said, I travel for shows. I host all these shows and I don't want to come home because it is stressful. My home is stressful. It looks beautiful, but it's completely stressful. So when she was out of town, I went to her house for a week, organized the entire thing. And to this day, and it's been now almost 5 months, and she just said, "You have given me calm in your own home," which is something I didn't have. So that's this weird emotional fulfillment now that I'm getting that a normal, like a TV job or a writing job or something doesn't give you. It's this physical accomplishment that is really helping someone else. And so there's all of these boxes to check. And, who knows? Maybe that's my future.
Another creative challenge to see if you can make this into something and take all that HGTV experience, all that creativity. I just love that it's all kind of wound up and you have all of these roads in front of you and you get to choose which lane you're going to be in and what you're going to follow. And as your friend and someone who's known you for so long, that's so exciting to me to see. And I'm
Thank
just so
you.
proud of you, really, for
Right back
everything.
at you. I am proud of you too. I'm proud of us. I think, that's another thing is to hold each other up and to really just be the biggest cheerleader for each other. And
Mhm.
anytime I can't do something, I always make sure that someone I care about gets the job. Always.
Mm, yep.
And that's really, really important to me.
Mhm. Oh, well, Cindy, thank you so much for being here and
Thanks
sharing
for
your
having me.
journey. Yeah, it's been so much fun. I'll link to all the ways that our listeners can connect with you in the show notes, along with the book link as well. And I wish you
Thank
the
you.
best for the book and everything.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciate it. And so great talking to you. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found some gems of inspiration and some takeaways to help you on your path to second act success. To view show notes from this episode, visit secondactsuccess.co. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Reviews only take a few moments and they really do mean so much. Thank you again for listening. I'm Shannon Russell, and this is Second Act Success.